Today, we're having an important conversation about mental health in athletics, something that's deeply personal for me and for our guest, Claire Kehoe, one of the founders of Morgan's Message. So welcome, Claire.
Thanks for having me, Anne.
I'm happy you're here. So just a little background, right? Morgan was a Division I athlete at Duke University, and her story became a catalyst for change. And instead of starting right at the beginning with Morgan's story, I want to explore the world she lived in and what many athletes today still experience. So Claire, you were a pretty accomplished one athlete and you carried a pretty rigorous academic load. So take us back. What were some of the mental pressures you were under as a student athlete?
I actually played at the club level at Duke, but Morgan was one of my teammates growing up. So I actually was with her. We were on the same club team through the recruiting process in high school. And at Duke, Morgan and I stayed very close while she was on the D1 team. So I can also give a little bit of kind of insight into even the differences in our lives at those two different levels. So when we were in college, it was a bit ago. We graduated 2019, so 6 years ago at this point. And it looked a little bit different. We didn't have kind of NIL and a lot of these added social media and business aspects that exist today. But I'd say a lot has stayed the same since then. I think, like you said, so many different pressures on student athletes broadly. I think no matter what level you're competing at, it is a full-time job or responsibility beyond your identity also as a student and as a human. I think when we look at college-age students, right, there's so much you're navigating. For most people, you're probably living away from home for the first time. You are a student first, so you're balancing a rigorous course load. I was a neuroscience major in college and actually on the pre-med track at the time. So school was super important to me, but it also took up a lot of my time. I spent a lot of hours in my science classes, lab components. Morgan and I actually crossed over a couple times in some of our psychology courses, and add on to that all the extras, right? So for Morgan, as a D1 student athlete, right, she had lift, she had practice, she had video sessions, then she'd have games and travel for games. Even for me at a different level as a club athlete, which was a big step down, obviously, from Morgan's commitment, I still was practicing multiple times a week. I still was traveling for tournaments and games. And on top of that, add, a social life and other extracurriculars. I was someone that involved myself in a ton of things at Duke. I was in numerous clubs. It was really important for me while I was in college to give back to the community. So I was involved as a tutor for some local middle and high school students, things that I love to do. But when you kind of break down what that schedule looks like, it feels like there's not much time left for you. And so I think for me, one of the biggest things was always kind of going back to, why am I doing these things? Like, yes, some of them felt like these obligations. Some of them felt like these, non-negotiables that I had to show up and do them. But just remembering that these were all things that at the end of the day made me happy for the most part, right? Were things that I truly enjoyed doing and also fulfilled me. So I think what was really key, and I think we have a lot more awareness today than we did even when I was in college, but making sure to find that balance, even in the midst of a crazy, chaotic schedule, finding that time for yourself, filling your cup in whatever way that might be. And even with this strong identity as a student, as an athlete, put in any, adjective or noun that describes what someone likes to do. I think it's so important to ground ourselves even in the midst of, I think, the chaos that we probably all experience.
Yeah, see, you described that really well, right? It's a full schedule. It is a full schedule, and it's a job. It's a job. And so when it's your job and it's everything you do, and then an injury happens, especially something as major as an ACL tear, like Morgan experienced, from your perspective, what changes for that athlete?
Yeah, and I can speak firsthand because I was with Morgan at Duke when she got injured. So it was her sophomore year, a couple weeks before season. I'll never forget her kind of calling me afterwards. But yeah, she suffered not an uncommon injury, a non-contact knee injury during practice, just took a dodge and her knee completely gave out. So she had level 3 tears of her ACL, her MCL, and her meniscus was completely destroyed. And just from someone who was her friend, I was very fortunate myself to not have any major injuries throughout my career. But for Morgan, this was devastating. She was someone who had put so much in to get to this point. She was an athlete her entire life. She was highly recruited out of high school. Her dream had always been to play at a school like Duke. Coming into a program like that, Morgan didn't see a ton of playing time her first year, but she expected that. She always was someone that came in like a sponge. She just wanted to learn, get better. And so kind of all those pieces were falling into place. Kind of the off season for lacrosse is fall. So during that fall of her sophomore year, she really was shining. All of that work she had put in practice, outside of practice, was finally kind of coming into place. And unfortunately, in the most unexpected way, right, it all came crashing down in practice one day. So I think when we look back on Morgan's story and this injury, I think it speaks to a much larger thing that athletes, wrap up so much of their identity in being an athlete. Morgan had so many talents. She was also an amazing artist, but she would never lead with that, right? Like to her, she was this athlete. She was a lacrosse player, and that was so much of who she was. And so even though at the time Morgan was faced with about a year recovery period, this was absolutely heartbreaking, especially after putting so much in. And I think what we're bringing a lot more awareness to now is that, there's obviously a huge physical toll when you have an injury of that level, right? And a year to get back on the field is a really long time. You're undergoing surgery and then all the rehab that follows. But I think really the aspect that impacted Morgan so greatly was, who am I when I'm not able to compete at the level that I previously was or had always thought I would compete at? So I think for her, it became, despite still being involved with the team, obviously there's always a role for injured athletes. They have their IR, like injured reserve, but your role changes. And I think it's really challenging to feel this connection, feel like you're still contributing when you physically aren't able to. And I know for Morgan, it was really hard, especially she tore it right before season. She then wasn't traveling with the team that season because she had just gotten injured. And I think it's hard to, again, maintain that confidence in who you are, what your role is, how you fit into this team when you are someone that's injured. You're still contributing in so many ways, but it's not in the ways that are easy to track, right? It's not the stat line or the contributions in a practice or a game when you are that injured athlete.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult. And you called out a couple things that were so important. Is one, many athletes see their identity through sports, right? I am a lacrosse player. I am a basketball player. And without my sport, who am I? I have worked with 3 athletes through their injury recovery journey and, honored that they invited me. I was working with them healthy and then just stayed with them through the journey. And the journey parallels the 5 stages of grief. And often that's overlooked, right? And grief is not linear, right? Grief, you can go forward, backward. And I say it's like a long, dark tunnel. It's really, really hard. So thank you for giving us that important insight. So when you reflect on Morgan's death and the time just after that, what propelled you and the family to action?
Yeah, great question. And I like your analogy of grief is not just a straight line. So I think that's really been indicative of all of our journeys after losing Morgan. So Morgan unfortunately died by suicide on July 11th, 2019. At this time, anyone who was kind of classmates with Morgan like I was, we had just graduated college. So I had graduated in May of 2019. I had actually just moved up to New York City where I was starting what I thought would be a gap year or 2 before going back to school. And so add that layer of, we were all new adults for the first time, basically, navigating this first year, which remove any sense of grief, is a really challenging year in that transition after college into the real world. And I think for all of us, it obviously impacted us in different ways. Morgan was someone who, yes, had struggled throughout college. She actually took medical leave her junior year to really focus on herself, but this still came as a complete surprise to all of us. It was not something I had ever fathomed would remotely happen, despite having seen Morgan in some really challenging moments and times. And I think for all of us, there was that initial shock, 100%. I think for me, kind of in the months that followed, it led to a lot of my own self-reflection, kind of going back to my roots of what's important to me, what do I want to be doing. It actually led me to change my career a little bit, just kind of in the wake of what I was feeling. And I think, can't speak for all of them, but I think all of kind of our family and friends that now are a part of Morgan's Message really struggled that first year. It was, again, no one expects this, right? So it came as such a surprise. And all of us, I think, had so many different moments of doubt, of confusion, frustration at times of just, why are we in this position today? And then I think with some time came this kind of next step forward, right? Of, yes, we're feeling all of these things. We can't push away what we're feeling. It's important that we address them. And also, how do we find a way to move forward? COVID also happened that next spring. So that was another big unexpected for our entire world. And I think that was also a time that a lot of us were forced to reflect, as there wasn't, there was so much going on, but also so little going on. And so I think it actually allowed us an opportunity. Like I said, all of us that had graduated were all over the world. One of our other co-founders actually was a Peace Corps volunteer. She was in Botswana. She went to Botswana a week after Morgan's funeral and had been there serving. And obviously when COVID struck, I came home. And so it was actually an opportunity for us to kind of regroup. I think we had each been navigating our grief in different ways and had this opportunity around Morgan's birthday, which is actually March 27th at the end of May, to come together at the Rodgers house. Social distance, because that was the time, but a chance to really regroup and have kind of all of us in this space for probably the first time where all of us could physically be there since Morgan's memorial. And so in those moments, we really talked about what happened to Morgan, right? Like let's think about her story. Let's think about, we can't change anything, but are there any factors or things that we think we could somehow positively change going forward so that other students who are navigating similar situations to Morgan or other broad, mental health challenges feel supported. Morgan was someone who put on a really brave face to people around her. Like I said, this was completely shocking to everyone, but Morgan wrote a lot down. She was someone that journaled a lot. And so her family has learned so much from reading what Morgan wrote, and a lot of what she wrote spoke to stigma, feeling like she was so isolated and alone in what she was going through, despite having a lot of support around her, feeling uncomfortable with really letting everyone into the depths of what she was experiencing. So Morgan's Message as a concept really started as this idea to start a podcast. We wanted to create a platform for individuals to share their stories, because we felt that maybe if Morgan had heard and seen stories of people who looked like her in similar positions, kind of going through something difficult, but also finding that hope, that who knows, maybe it could have impacted her in some way. So that was actually the starting point for Morgan's Message. We officially launched the organization a year after her passing on July 2020. Obviously, we've grown a lot since then. With that came a lot of excitement from the student athlete community. When we decided, where were we going to focus, that group made a lot of sense because it was such a huge aspect of Morgan's identity and Morgan's life. Like I said, she was so many other things besides an athlete, but in thinking about, where are we going to start, student athletes made a lot of sense. And so we were lucky, we gained a lot of kind of grassroots momentum. We had a lot of support from all different types of people. Yes, people that obviously had known Morgan, but also people who didn't know Morgan that were greatly impacted by her story. And ultimately, yes, we have a podcast series. It's called The Mental Matchup. It's our podcast and blog where we share stories. We highlight individuals' experiences, which again was the starting idea for Morgan's Message. We also do bring in different types of professionals. We also sometimes have had guests that are loved ones of individuals who have navigated mental health challenges, because there's such a role for that as well. And that is a group that I think probably doesn't get enough attention, kind of the support system, because it is really challenging no matter what, whether you're a parent, a friend, a teammate, there's a big role there. And then the part I work on most closely with Morgan's Message is our education program, which again was not actually on the drawing board day one, but We were super fortunate. One of Morgan's former teammates, who I actually had the privilege of knowing because she was a freshman at Duke when I was a senior, and I actually met her through Morgan, had started a group at Duke in the wake of Morgan's passing. It was just a group for student athletes to come together, an opportunity to talk and connect. And so Anna Callahan officially became our first ambassador. She basically had kept in touch with the Rodgers family in that year or so, and was like, this is something that I've started at Duke, and I think it would be something that would be really beneficial on all different types of campuses. And so that's where the idea for this ambassador program or our education program really stemmed. It's an opportunity for students, high school and college students, to become a part of our organization and bring our organization back to their campuses in the form of, a chapter or a club. These groups are really focused on community. It's an opportunity peer-to-peer. It's all led by students, for students to come together. We provide them with materials, educational resources, activities, other leadership support that they take back to their campuses. They host meetings on about a monthly basis. And our goal here is really, starting these conversations, providing them with this starting point for education. We have a lot of reflective questions, and then just building this community of support. So much of the kind of response we've heard from students is, wow, it's so refreshing to have this space where I can really show up as me. As student athletes, you face so much pressure like we've discussed, and we don't really often have a space where we can just take all those layers off and be human. And that's really our goal of having these groups on campus, is making sure students have this space to connect, have this outlet, have this opportunity to enrich themselves and really focus on their mental health and well-being.
So you said something that one of your participants on a campus program said, this is so refreshing. I can just be me. Have you heard any other examples of thank you? This is such an important gift.
Yeah, I think some of the ones that stick with me the most are just hearing so many people who've been inspired to share their stories. It doesn't have to be on a public platform, but just share what they're experiencing with one other person. And I think those are the ones that touch me the most, because that's why we started this, right? Our goal was to make sure that if someone was going through something, if they felt isolated and alone, to know that they're not alone, that there is community, that there is support. And so we have a lot of those stories. People reaching out to us, whether it's from listening to a podcast episode, whether it's from being a part of Morgan's Message on their campus. And I think it's amazing also to hear about the friendships that have formed. We have students that are at huge universities that might not have ever crossed paths, but they joined this group together and now they're lifelong friends. And one of the other things I'm really proud of is we actually have numerous campuses that have advocated for additional clinical resources. While Morgan's Message doesn't provide clinical resources, yes, we amplify resources that exist in their communities and nationwide. We aren't providing a clinical service, but a lot of our students who are so passionate about this have used their groups as a way to bolster their voices, to go to administrations, athletic departments, and actually have succeeded in hiring additional professionals that are focused on student athletes. So I think that's one of the things is there's a deficit of resources broadly for students on campuses. But when you look at student athletes specifically, I think it is such a unique group. Yes, there's a lot of common pressures that all students face, but I think student athletes, there's so many unique things. So actually having professional resources or just resources in general tailored towards this group is so important, because not every clinician is going to understand the world of an athlete. And this could go for so many different identity groups. And that's why it is so important that we have diverse professionals that, can relate to so many different students. But I think that's been a huge win, is obviously the community aspect, the grassroots aspect, but then actually seeing that in action and that it's leading to more support for students coming from the top down, coming from these schools and universities, which I think is just amazing to see the impact these students are having and creating lasting change. So many of them are motivated. Obviously, they might be on that campus for only 4 years, but so many of them care beyond that, right? They're a part of this group because they want to make things better for the future athletes that come to their campuses.
Morgan would be proud. She'd be so proud of all the work that you've done. So if I am a student athlete on a campus and maybe this is the first time learning of Morgan's Message, how do I become an ambassador? What's the next step?
Yeah, great question. So on our website, which is morgansmessage.org, there's a whole section for what we call our student athlete campus ambassadors. So if you go to that page, it'll give an overview of kind of what the program looks like. I've covered it kind of at a high level today on this talk, but from there, you'll see actually an application. One of the big things we always emphasize is that we want students to come to us who want to be here, right? We don't want anyone to feel like they're obligated to become an ambassador because a parent wants them to do it or a coach wants them to do it. So if you are interested in kind of taking on a greater role and bringing Morgan's Message to your campus, this is for you. So there is a short application that just is a lot of its basic information as well as why you want to get involved. After that point, we go through an onboarding process. So you'll hear from our team after submitting that application. We do a live onboarding Zoom session with a few members of our education team to give you some context on the organization, put some faces to who we are, and then focus on what your role actually looks like in action on a daily basis. We highlight a lot of the resources we provide. So actually every campus we work with has a point person within my team who we call their liaison. Our biggest goal here is that student athletes are busy. We want to make sure that, it's not a burden for them to get involved in this program. I always say to people, it is what you make it. We don't intend it to be a massive time commitment, but if you decide this is something that is really important to you and you want to pour more into it, absolutely, we would love that. But we try and make sure that we give them as much support as possible. We have this point of contact, the liaison. Our ambassadors all also receive access to what we call our ambassador portal. We work with a company called Tat Health, and it's basically a login page, a one-stop shop for all of these materials that they might need to successfully have their chapter. So we have presentations, discussion questions, activities. We have a bunch of support for them as leaders, how to actually establish this group, how to host larger events, how to approach conversations with your coaches about hosting an event or your administration, whatever it might be. But our goal is really to not overwhelm them with too many options, but give them that support, give them these resources so that, one, we're making sure we're putting the best information out there. We have an amazing medical advisory council who helps support the development of all of our resources. Everything we provide is unique to Morgan's Message. We're not just recycling things. All of these materials are created for students to share with other students, which I think is also unique. There are other programs, but there's not a ton of programs out there that are really leading peer-to-peer efforts. And that was so important to us because we feel like students have so much passion. And I think a lot of times, especially when we're encouraging vulnerable conversation, peers are a much easier connection than if this was coming from the top down. So we try our best to give the students as much support as possible. The other real benefit for students getting involved is not only the work you'll be doing on your campus, but it's an opportunity to connect with other like-minded students. Today, our ambassador program has nearly 7,000 ambassadors, which is amazing. Nearly 2,000 campuses are involved at all levels, high school, college. We have athletes all levels, even within college. And so there's also a chance for you to connect across campuses. We bring all of our ambassadors together on a bi-monthly basis for what we call our all ambassador calls. It's a chance for them to hear major updates and exciting news from our team. We also bring in some expert guest speakers for them to be exposed to, and it's a chance for them to get to know each other. Because I think it's amazing. So many of these students obviously are making such an impact in their immediate communities, but also I think the opportunity to bring together these like people around the world is, I think, another really cool aspect of our program.
What a powerful support process. And 7,000 ambassadors in such a short amount of time. That speaks to the volume on the need. So, question I have, none of this can be free, right? All of this has to cost a little bit. So how are you funded, and how can people who maybe are parents and not ambassadors perhaps support the message?
Yeah, great question. So I will say it is free to all of our students. So all of our programs that we offer to our ambassadors is at no cost. They are volunteers, but we do not charge them for anything that they are doing on their campuses. And that's something that we have hoped to never change because we want to make sure we want this information out there. So how we are supported kind of a wide range of ways. We receive grant funding. We have some very generous opportunities through grant. The local community where Morgan is from in Warrenton, Virginia, and the surrounding kind of Fauquier County, there's some amazing nonprofits in that region that exist to support other local nonprofits. So we've been very lucky to receive generous support there. We also have some partnerships. We actually just recently announced we're partnering with Powerade, which is a huge milestone for us. So we also receive some contributions through partnerships like that. And a lot is donations. We are so lucky to have such a supportive community that has really propelled us forward. So that kind of through a lot of different ways, probably that's most ways we can think of, but we've been very lucky to have so much support from our community. And I'll also add for my parents or my coaches that might be listening, there actually is an opportunity for you to get involved as well and take action. Yes, our focus is always going to be student athletes, but we've had a lot of interest from the people who support student athletes who want to help us propel our mission forward. And so we actually have an arm of our education program called our at-large ambassadors. And this is for adults. So this could be recent college graduates, this could be parents, this could be athletic staff, or any adult who identifies as a mental health advocate who wants to help us spread our mission and vision, in whatever community space you exist in. And so just like our student ambassador program, you can find more information on our website. This group's a little bit different. You're not going to be hosting monthly meetings or larger events on your campus, but it's a chance for adults to come together. That group meets bi-monthly as well. Similarly, they have an opportunity to hear from some expert guest speakers. And then also we provide them with some resources on how to activate in their community. So it's going to look different than the students, but I think there is an opportunity for adults as well who might be interested to get involved and bring Morgan's message to their workplace, their community, their families, club lacrosse sports teams as well. So obviously monetary donations are amazing, but if you want to take action, there is an opportunity for that as well.
Fabulous. So I'm going to ask one more question. Let's say I'm a struggling student athlete on a campus with no Morgan's message. What advice would you give that person?
Yeah, I think that my advice to people is always don't be afraid to let one person in. It doesn't have to be, I think there's a lot of fear around seeking professional help. And for many people, that's not the first step. The first step is letting someone in. And, that person might be different for everyone, but it could be a friend, a teammate, it could be a coach, it could be a parent, but just letting one person that you trust into your world. I think all of us work tirelessly, especially in this day and age with social media, to put on this highlight reel. And the reality is all of us struggle in some capacity. And so I just encourage anyone who might be going through something, first off, know that, you are not alone. It can feel so isolating and dark. I know you gave the analogy of the dark tunnel. It really feels like that. And it feels like there is never an end and that it's hard to see that light at the end of the tunnel. But there is hope. There is support. And I think that the hardest first step, but such an important first step, is, not being afraid to be vulnerable and, tell one person that, whatever it might be, just something's not right, or this is what's going on with me right now. Because letting someone else in, make sure that you don't have to face this by yourself. I think that's one of the key things that's cornerstone to the work we do at Morgan's Message is that, there is community. Mental health is not something that we are meant to experience in isolation. Mental health inherently is going to involve our environment and the people around us. And so I think I'd encourage anyone who's going through something. It's scary. It's really hard to let someone in, but it's so important because then that person, it's not just you facing this by yourself.
Yeah, Claire, right? We're not alone. Tell somebody, let them in. So Claire, I want to honor you and say thank you so much for sharing Morgan's story and the mission of Morgan's message. These aren't easy conversations, and when there's loss, it's like forever. I love how you're honoring her in changing the game, changing things for the athletes today and in the future. Listening, don't wait. If you're a coach or a parent and you want to get involved, make space for these real conversations. And if you want to learn more, go to morgansmessage.org and join the movement. So Claire, thank you so much.
Thank you.